Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of B2B Revealed. B2B Revealed brings you the best of B2B. Whether you're a B2B seller, a B2B marketer, or simply a B2B leader, this show will provide you the tools and insights you need to be successful. My name's Sean Campbell. I'm the CEO of Cascade Insights and I'm your host. I love to hear from listeners. If you have any questions about the show or you would like to suggest a topic I should cover in the future, just email me at Sean, S-E-A-N, at cascadeinsights.com. On this episode, I'll be interviewing Troy Hazard. Troy is the author of several books, including Future-Proofing Your Business. He's also a TV host and an incredibly well-regarded speaker who has delivered keynote presentations in over 23 different countries to date. Troy had a lot of interesting things to say about how you should get ready for your next conference talk and what separates a talk that bores from one that roars. If you ever plan to give a conference talk or you've got one already on your schedule, I'm sure you're going to love hearing what Troy has to say. Finally, if you love this show, don't forget to post a review of the show on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you happen to listen. And now, on to the show. Troy, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So Troy, tell the listeners a little bit about your background. I gave a little bit of an intro on you at the start, but obviously it's great to hear it in your own words as well.
So I actually fell into private enterprise about almost 30 years ago now. I was working at a radio station in Australia and working pretty hard, long days, 18 hours a day, back to back. And I walked into my boss and I said, look, I need a bit of assistance here. I need either a raise or someone to help me in my department because I just come out of time. And he said, well, how about a holiday? And I said, yeah, that'd be great too. He said, good, you're fired. So I had this instant entry into private enterprise. I actually went home and saw a news article that night on the television that talked about the property market moving and how people were getting into renovate houses. And so I rang my mother and said, hey, look, I think I might renovate houses. And the market's moving. And she said, that's a great idea, Troy, but you're not very handy. So I didn't heed her advice. We ended up renovating 13 properties over the next 18 months. And I did that with her. She is an interior decorator. So I did the property deals, she did the decoration, and we flipped houses for a couple of years there and made a bit of money and got ourselves started in business.
Cool. And I'm not very handy myself, but yet I built my own house with my father-in-law. So I totally get that. I tell people all the time that I can't make a right angle without help kind of thing. But otherwise, I'm pretty good. So the place I want to talk to you about is actually, and we can talk about your business background and some of that stuff as we go through this, but you've got a unique perspective when it comes to speaking at conferences. You do that a lot. And the relevancy to our audience is that a lot of our listeners work for mid-market or enterprise companies, or they're maybe with small companies that consult with large companies and things like that. And they go to a lot of conferences, obviously. And I think there's two things that are true. One, they're asked to speak sometimes at these conferences. And two, they also probably have some very strong opinions about the speakers from a keynote or breakout perspective. So that's what I want to talk to you a little bit about at the start. So my first question is, what have you learned from being a speaker at 50 conferences a year that our listeners need to know?
I think the simple thing that I picked up 20 years ago now when I started speaking was to not go with the statistics, go with the stories. Everyone gets to these conferences and they get death by PowerPoint and everyone throws up a bunch of statistics about the industry or their business or the market or the consumer. And that's handy, but that's the stuff you can read on a weekend or in an article online of a morning over coffee. You don't actually want to pay to go and sit in a room with 500 of your friends to listen to a guy or a girl read a bunch of stats that you could get anywhere else in the world at any time that you choose. So what I learned very early in the piece was to try and engage the audience energetically and empathetically by telling them stories of the things that you've learned, or a story about what's happened in your business, or how you evolved as a business leader, or how you evolved the brand you were leading, and attach it to a real life incident that happened that changed your trajectory in life, or that changed the way you think about things, or the way you approach a market, or the way you take a product to market. People relate to stories. That's why we like the movies. We like to see the hero win and the villain get crushed and all that sort of stuff. And it's exactly the same on stage. If you connect with them and take them on the journey that you went on, then you've got a far more empathetic, energetic engagement with the audience, and they'll still learn things on the fly. It's not as they're going to just go there and get a bedtime story. They're still going to learn from your mistakes or your successes, but they're going to be part of that story. They're going to immerse themselves in the journey. And there's a far better learning opportunity when you do it that way.
What are your tips for folks when it comes to kind of finding the story? Because I think some folks are natural storytellers. Some folks kind of almost think of their life as a story, right? That's got multiple chapters in it. And other people are like, nothing ever interesting has happened to me. And by corporate rules, I can't say anything interesting. So what would be your advice to them? How do they kind of discover a story that they can hang kind of their talk on?
Well, I think everybody's interesting, and it hasn't got to be a life-threatening, life-altering experience that you talk about. I tell stories about how I bought a shirt once for $300. And that's a pretty basic transaction in a really simple retail environment. But the story is attached to an emotion, it's attached to an experience, it's attached to an interaction and quite a significant transaction for a shirt. But at the end of the day, audience still takes away a real learning from that. Like, oh, okay, that's interesting. If I applied that same customer service experience or that same energetic engagement with my customers, maybe I could sell my stuff for more than market value. Maybe I could get repeat business from the same guys and girls coming back and buying more of that product at a higher market value because I've engaged them differently. So it's a really basic story, but it's made interesting by the way it's delivered and attached to a lesson and an action. And I think that's key to the whole setup is not just tell a story and hope people laugh at it or hope it sticks. It needs to be attached to what did you learn from that? What was the actions you took after that changed the way you thought about things or changed the way you engaged or did business or even the way you lived your life?
That's good tips. That's really a nice, actionable, short framework for folks to think about. What are some things you think you need to avoid as a conference speaker?
Well, I think I see a lot of, as industry speakers in particular, they turn up and they are almost patronizing or condescending to their audiences. It's like, you've hired me because I'm the authority. You've hired me or you've asked me to speak because I've got the information that will help you in your journey. Let me deliver that to you like your school kids. And of course, that's the quickest way you could possibly shut down an audience because you've got to assume that the people in the audience are just as smart as you are. And in fact, in lots of instances, a lot smarter. I mean, I've addressed crowds across the world where I can physically stand on stage and look into the audience and know that these guys have had more experience than me, been around longer than me, certainly smarter than me, and I need to find a way to empathetically engage them as a peer rather than as a teacher. And I think a lot of industry speakers in particular believe that because they've been invited to speak or because they've been given that platform that they need to teach. And that's probably the worst thing you can do. People will learn in their own style, in their own fashion. Some of them are audible, some of them are visible, some of them are tactile. And you need to offer them that opportunity to learn their own way. And the only way to do that is to come back to that same storytelling piece where you're not actually teaching me stuff. You are telling me stuff and sharing an experience such that I might learn from that and let me learn at my own pace and space.
Yeah, I think that's really strong because I think we've always seen a lot of speakers where they kind of teach/preach when we don't really want to hear that, right? And you've probably had similar experiences, I would guess.
Yeah, I think so. And there's a certain style that you adopt, I think, over the years where it is about saying maybe you can learn from that. And if you can't, okay, maybe there's an application of the story or an application of this lesson that you might be able to twist or to change slightly to suit your industry or your circumstance or the evolution of your business or the cycle you're in your industry. You don't want to assume anything about their lives or their journey, but you do want to open them up to say, well, just try and take this information and think a bit laterally about the application to you and your world. Because at the end of the day, consumers are the same everywhere, and we all want the same things in a transaction. So there's clearly something you can learn from that if you choose to not believe it's different for you. And I think a lot of people that go to the functions like this walk in the front door and they are absorbent of the information, but at exactly the same time, they're discarding it in the back of their head as this cycle goes around and they say, yeah, good stuff, yeah, that's interesting, but you know, it's different for me in my area. My customers are shorter, and that's not going to work for me. And I think that's half the problem with these events and an ability for a speaker to cut through. It's about trying to convince them that you are in fact one of them and you made these basic mistakes as a business owner or leader. And as a result, these are the things you changed to evolve. Maybe there's something you can draw from that. And keep it like an open-ended question. I'm hoping there's things you can take away from this and apply to your business or your life, but I'd like you to just think a bit laterally about how you might do that.
Fair enough. And let's dig a little more into that because I think you're spot on when you say that one of the challenges with business conferences is, you know, if you have 200 people in the room, there's a guy from Exxon in the back that says, well, that doesn't apply to Exxon because we're Exxon.
Yeah.
And then there's another guy who says, well, I own a bunch of McDonald's and that doesn't apply to me. And there's another guy that says, well, I work out of Singapore and none of that applies to me. And so How do you unify a room like that? Because I think that's one of the things, especially if you're in a corporate environment and you're asked to speak at one of these events. If you're used to speaking to peers and now all of a sudden you're in this very diverse room and you're like, why did everybody seem to treat what I said with some degree of disdain? I think a lot of it's because they're not addressing that problem you're just talking about.
I think so. And for me, the easiest way to get past that is to engage them personally. So I rarely start on a business story. It's always on a personal story. And I'm trying to have them look introspectively at their lives before they look introspectively at their businesses. Because you're right, everyone thinks their business is different, their customers are different, my suburb, my city, my country. Yeah, you don't get it, it's different here. But humans run essentially on the same emotions, no matter where you are in the world. And we've worked in 16 different countries and with all different languages, cultures, a range of different influences on the people that we've worked with. But if I can bring it back to a personal or an emotional position, then the introspective view of the world changes their view of the information I'm delivering and its application to their lives and their businesses. By way of example, I often start on a story about how I lost $1 million in a week. And you can almost see the entire room lean forward, and they're not wondering what piece of brilliance I'm going to deliver. What they're wondering is, how's he going to get out of this? I want to hear their story. And I take them on the emotional journey first. Here's what I felt when that happened to me. These are the things that were running through my head. This is how I reacted emotionally to this position. And then I took a beat and worked out what I needed to do from a business perspective to work my way out of it. And because I've engaged them on that personal level, you can almost feel them go, oh, look, I've had a moment like that in my life, and that's how I felt too. Now I have their attention. Now I can walk them through this whole concept that it's not different for them because I've just emotionally engaged them with exactly the same feelings that I had, and they've had a similar experience that may or may not have been the quantum of mine, but certainly everyone has a roadblock or a speed bump in their lives and their business they have to deal with. And if you can attach something to that, if you can attach them to that thought, that notion, that emotion, now I can talk to them about how it's universal across the planet and how we approach these things. It can be a universal experience for all of us, and you can learn from the guy sitting beside you no matter what industry he's from or what country he's from.
Sounds good. Really, really good points. One other kind of similar question along the line of kind of what the attendees think or their expectations. What are some unrealistic expectations you think that conference goers typically have about the conferences they attend or the speakers they're going to see at those conferences?
I think a lot of people would sit in an audience and either believe that the speaker's going to solve the problems of the world for them, or they're going to believe that they haven't got any problems, both of which are incorrect. I don't care how good your business is or how long you've been in business or how much money you make every year or how you please your shareholders every year with the great dividends you deliver to them. At every moment in your journey, there will be something that interrupts that flow, something that gets in the way, whether it's good or a bad interruption. It will still interrupt the journey in some way, shape, or form. So each and every individual in the room is dealing with some form of challenge, good or bad, that they maybe don't have an answer to, but are maybe too proud to announce that to their peer sitting beside them, or certainly to anybody else that they have no real relationship with. So from my perspective, key to getting things out of an event is to come with an open mind and an honest and open heart. Something that says that I know that I've got things to deal with. I know that I can't necessarily solve them as efficiently and as effectively as I'd like to. But if I listen to these guys, maybe I'll get a gem from that I might be able to apply to make that journey a little bit easier. And I often joke on stage saying, look, I know 90% of you guys walked in the room 40 minutes ago, and I know you're sitting back there thinking, come on, ball guy, impress me. And it's not my job to impress these guys. It's my job to share some thoughts, to share some experiences, and to open up that whole thought-provoking process to have them think a bit differently about what they can do to control their lives and their futures. Because at the end of the day, I'm not going to be there tomorrow when their alarm goes off. They've got to get up and do it themselves. And I think the very real and honest understanding of that as an audience participant is the thing that will motivate you to go back from the event and actually want to do something differently and feel that desire to be better tomorrow than you are today, rather than just believe you can be by osmosis. Excellent points.
Let's talk a little bit about, in terms of storytelling here, give you a little opportunity. What's the worst conference session you've ever seen, and what's the best and why?
That's a really hard question. I've probably done a few of those myself along the way.
And that's fair. You could talk about yourself as the worst session too, if you want, or the best, either way.
Yeah. Look, I can recall going back 20-something odd years ago when I first started speaking. And again, I fell into this as an invitation to have a chat at a conference, and all of a sudden I find myself on the speaking circuit 20 years later, running all over the world talking to people. But I can recall one of the early presentations I did where I let the audience take control of the journey I was trying to take them on. I was too focused on the facial expressions and the feedback I was getting visually from the audience, and felt that I wasn't engaging them. So as a result, I changed my stories. I was rearranging and changing the presentation on the fly, thinking I was actually doing myself a favour by finding a different way to engage the group in front of me. And in actual fact, all I did was end up putting myself into a loop and not getting to any of the key points I wanted to get to. So what I think I've learned over the years is that my job is to get up there and pretty much have some fun. Share some stories that are interesting, that are entertaining, things that have been significant to me, and also things I know I've seen in other businesses we've consulted to that we've made these significant changes for them by sharing some of these experiences and taking them on a different path or a different journey. And if I can do that and just simply be authentic, then I get engagement, because everyone's going, oh, he's just an average guy like me. He's just an average business guy having a go, trying to make a few bucks, feed his family, go on holidays, drive a fast car or whatever. So I can relate to that. That's exactly what I want to have in life. So, all right, I'll keep listening to this, because this is really a reflection of what I'm trying to achieve in life. And maybe I'll learn something from his journey I can apply to mine. And so over the years, I think what I've learned is that if you get up there and you are not the authentic you, they're going to kill you. Because they'll see straight through it, and all of a sudden you don't have control of the room, because your lack of authenticity is being seen by those that you are presenting to, and they'll start cutting you down by looking at you a different way, by fidgeting in their seats, by answering a text on their phone. You can tell when you've lost them, and it's typically because you've not been authentic. It's as simple as that.
Awesome. Makes a ton of sense. So let's get to the other part of that question. What's the best session? Maybe you could say like even what conference or keynote speaker you enjoy listening to the most. Because obviously when you've gone to these conferences, you probably bumped into maybe similar speakers over time. There might be ones you really enjoy listening to.
Yeah, look, I have a number of guys and girls that I follow around the world. And in fact, still to this day, some 20 years down the track, I watch 30 minutes of speaker videos pretty much every day. It's rare for me to miss a day where I'm not just going through a Google search and searching for business speakers or adventure speakers or motivational speakers, not necessarily people that do the same thing I do. I'm just looking for different storytellers and different styles and different things they do on stage or the way they interact with their audience. The key thing for me is the good guys and the good girls that are in this business that really resonate with meeting planners and the people that hire them are the ones that can take an audience on an emotional journey, and they build them up and they bring them down, and then they build them up again, and then they crash them through the floor, and they drag them along because everyone's waiting for the next chapter, the next piece of the puzzle. And the entire hour then becomes this storybook that you don't quite know how it's going to finish, but you really want to just get to the next bit so you can try and work the puzzle out yourself, knowing all the time that you're probably not going to, and you have to wait to the end till you get the last little bit of information and you go, oh, wow, that's what happened. That was so cool. It's no different to watching a movie. If you figured out the end of a movie at the beginning of it, you probably wouldn't get to the end of it. You go, I know what's going to happen here. The villain's going to die. He's going to get the girl. They're going to ride off into the sunset. Life's good. I'll go and watch something else because I want to be intrigued. I don't want to be able to answer the whole story myself even before we get started. It's a very broad answer to your question, I know. But the guys that really have an impact on me in this business are the ones that take me on a full journey over the course of their presentation, where I want to know the end, but I just can't work it out. So I got to listen to the last minute. And that's the thing that really has me walk out the door and go, oh, that was just fantastic. I just love that.
Cool. Good stuff. On a different line of questioning here, but I know this is one that trips up folks, particularly in any kind of business conference, is how do you suggest that speakers talk about their company while they're giving their talk? Because this is such a lightning rod issue for attendees and conference creators and owners, and it's such a hard thing to get right.
Just to understand the question, are you referring to how I would present my company if I was a presenter, and in what light should I be portraying it to the audience members?
Well, I think there's that point in every talk where you have to decide how much are you going to describe what you offer as an organization or an individual or a consultant. And there's, the argument of don't say anything. Let them just give your bio and you'll be a smart guy and they'll follow up with you. But that doesn't always work in all environments, right? Or sometimes you're asked to include something about your company, your colleagues or whatever. And because audiences, I think, reacts sometimes somewhat negatively to obviously any kind of sense of a pitch, right?
Yes.
And it's the kind of thing where people get a little sideways. There is a way, I think, to share that kind of information. And I imagine you probably have some tips there. And there's obviously times where you can just go overboard and you've just shared way too much about the company and the offerings and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree. And look, I have a bit of an unusual way of describing this. I often get asked, how do I select employees? And what's the process I go through? And the answer I offer is, I've never read a resume. And people go, how can you employ someone if you don't read their resume? And my response is, no one has a bad resume. No one actually puts in the resume, I'm really good at this, but I suck at this other stuff. No one will ever tell you the things that they have shortfalls on or that they're not quite good at. And the same applies when you're pitching your company. If you're standing in front of a group of people and you're talking about your business, it would be an incredibly rare occasion for you to say, you know what, we've got this great product and this really innovative technology and it's really groundbreaking stuff, but geez, we're really bad at customer service. So I just want to apologize before you start working with us that we're going to give you a great product, but we're probably never going to call you back. But instead, they'll launch into why they're so good and why it's important that you should be talking to them, or how they've got this edge over their competitors, or what their values are, or their vision or their mission statement. And this whole pretty picture of we are the greatest, we're the best, that's why you should talk to us. And I'm not going to believe that either, because I can't possibly believe that they are that good, they are that buttoned up, that there's not going to be something somewhere that would trip them up in a business-to-business or even a business-to-consumer engagement. The middle ground is the safe ground. We've been around for 40 years. We've been really focused on technology. We had these 3 milestones in relation to that, where we've been able to release these products well ahead of our competitors, which has changed the face of the industry. We're very proud of that. But we also know that we've got to stay on our toes because our competitors are catching us. And one of the hardest things we have in this position is that to stay number one, you've got to continually look over your shoulder to watch the guy who's chasing you down, because he has the advantage. He knows what we look like and he knows where he's got to be to catch us and what he's got to do to catch us. And so it's easier for him to mimic what we're doing than it is for us to create what's next. And so in that environment, yes, we've got this great stuff for you. Yes, we've got fantastic technology, but we also need you guys to help us define what next is important to you. Define what that product should be. Help us help you on that journey. That would be the sort of pitch I'd be looking for, the real and, again, authentic and energetic engagement that says, yeah, we do a lot of things really well, but we know we've got to keep trying. We know that every day we've got to wake up and try and be better tomorrow than we are today. That's the honest way to present a business. Because now I'm listening to you going, actually, I believe this guy. That's pretty cool. They know they've got to keep on their toes and that their competition is right behind them, and they're conscious of that, and they want me to help them be better, and I'll do that because I'll give them some feedback. And now we can form a relationship because I need them to help me in my business. And so if I don't have that sort of relationship or interaction with them, then they probably can't do that for me. So all these things are running through my head as an audience member as you are being authentic and telling me about the good days and the not so good days, or the things you know you have to be conscious of to continue to have good days. Does that make sense?
Totally. Especially that emphasis, like you said, all the way through on authenticity. As you mentioned it earlier, too, in a different context. I think that's really, really strong points. Let me ask you to respond to this quote by none other than Mark Twain, who said, there are 2 types of speakers, those who get nervous and those who are liars. So you've obviously got a lot of history here, but Mark Twain would say that you get nervous too. What's the answer to that? Not so much an antidote, because that would mean you're not going to get nervous, but what would you say to folks to kind of deal with that, given it's well known that people have concerns when it comes to public speaking?
The simple answer is get through the first 3 minutes. That's what it boils down to. Over the years, obviously, I've got more comfortable with larger audiences, but even whether it's 100 people in the audience or whether it's 8,500 people in the audience, there's still that moment just before you step up where you have this moment of doubt that says, gee, I hope they like me today, or I hope I get through to them today, or I hope I connect today, or I really hope that they feel they've got some value out of what I've got to share with them over the next hour. And that's just being human, really. So for me, it's about making sure that I am so stitched up in that first couple of minutes that I can actually focus on what's next, not what's coming out of my mouth. It's almost this whole process of trying to be a minute ahead of yourself or 2 minutes ahead of yourself, because based on the reaction I get in the first couple of minutes, I may or may not change or rearrange the next 7 or 10 minutes and find a more significant way to engage the audience based on that initial response. And I think what a lot of speakers do is they get up on stage and the first couple of minutes they spend is, well, thanks for inviting me here. I'm really excited about being here. You look like such a great audience. It's a real privilege to address you. And on the way here in the cab, I was thinking, I'm so excited to have a chat with you. And then a minute later, they haven't even started their conversation. They're still introducing themselves. I learned a lesson from a fellow speaker years ago that the best way to start that presentation is to walk out and start it. Don't mess around with thanks for being here. G'day, I'm Troy. It's this wonderful day. Birds are chirping, sun is shining. I'll walk out onto the stage and say, let me take you back to 1996. I'm getting off a plane from Tokyo and I get a call from the office and the first thing is that they tell me we just lost $375,000. So in the first sentence, everyone's going, okay, what happens next? And I haven't wasted that very valuable space with small talk or give myself some credibility. I'm actually launching straight into the opening scene of the movie. And it's exactly what grabs you when you go to the movies, that first 30 seconds. That's why Bond films are so significantly successful, is that the first 60 seconds of a Bond film is all about James Bond getting himself into trouble, and then the next hour and a half is about him getting himself out of trouble. You're connected emotionally within seconds of the first scene starting. And I think that's where a lot of, dare I say, non-professional speakers trip themselves up. They feel that they have to calm their nerves with small talk, when in fact all the audience wants to do is to have you launch straight into it and start giving me some really cool content or engaging me on some level that says, oh, okay, I'm not going to waste the next 60 minutes of my life listening to this guy.
Those are stellar points. So a related point, I want to talk a little bit about practice. And to that point, there's this quote. I forget exactly who said it. Maybe when we put the show notes up on the blog, we'll link out to it. The quote is, if I don't practice 1 day, I know it. If I don't practice 2 days, my critics know it. If I don't practice 3 days, everyone knows it. And the reason I bring that up is that I think in corporate environments and business conferences, we all know it when the VP of marketing, who's picked maybe rightly for a million reasons, right? Not just their title, they're really smart. And they go up there and you're like, wow, you must have had a busy last 8 weeks because you didn't prepare at all. Not to say that vendors don't do this at conferences too, right? They certainly do. But I find there's this kind of resistance. You do this a ton, but even when I just casually talk to clients about, hey, you're going to go speak at that conference, I'll drop in, what have you been preparing? And they'll be like, I'm going to work on it on the flight. What are your thoughts about like how much preparation you need to go into and what's your kind of work back when you look at these things?
It's interesting. I have this conversation often with clients. So one of the questions I ask in my briefing calls is who's around me? Like who's going to be before me? Who's going to be after me? And in a lot of cases, it will be somebody from the business. It'll be the VP of marketing or the COO or the CEO with his annual address, or it'll be a vendor who's got their sponsorship piece or whatever. But I'm really curious to understand who is before and who is after, because it's going to change the way I start and the way I finish, so that I can bounce off the guy that was before me and potentially even lead into the guy who's after me and give them a running start. Because I know that 90% of those individuals that aren't professional speakers would be preparing on the plane on the way there. And I often try and coach the clients that they need to get their guys moving on their preparation for their presentations well before I even start. And I start 3 and 4 months out. So a classic example is I've got a conference call in the morning for an event in May. And it'll be the second call I've had with this client. And we'll be discussing content and I'll be starting to refine some stories and starting to frame up the 90 minutes that I've got with them on stage. And over the course of the next couple of months, I'll go back to that piece maybe 7 or 8 times, and I'll pick it up and I'll have a look at it and I'll play with it for a couple of hours and I'll put it down and I'll pick it up and I'll put it down. And along the way, I might have had another story to add that it's just happened to me or something that's a new experience, and I'll start to add those things in. I'll get closer to the day, and then probably about 3 or 4 weeks out, I'll actually do a video for the client, and I'll give them a little 7 or 10 minute video that walks them through the content and says, okay, here's the journey I'm going to take the audience on over 90 minutes. Here's the start, here's the middle, here's the finish. Give me some feedback on that. And then I'll continue to refine that before I get there. So for a 90-minute presentation, typically I've got like a 3 or 4 month lead up for that presentation where I've got 2 or 3 calls with the client that are probably 45 minutes to an hour long. I will spend about probably 20 hours for an hour-long presentation, maybe 25 hours for a 90-minute presentation. And then the 2 or 3 days out, I'll start replaying the entire presentation in my head over and over and over again, to the point where the day before, I've got a clear head because I've now know the speaking engagements between that moment in time and the time I step on stage. I'll replay that presentation in my head the day before 5, 6 times. That's my day at work, is just simply going through the presentation, timing it out, making sure that my transitions are working, making sure that one story pivots to the next and everything starts to link and it's got a nice flow to it and it's got a really cool finish that'll send them out the door with some stuff to do. And I'm a professional. I do 50 of these things a year all over the world. For Larry, who steps up on stage as the SVP of marketing, who does one of these things a year at his annual conference, who's going to talk for exactly the same amount of time I'm going to talk, and he prepares on the plane on the way there, he's killing himself. He's going to get belted. And I just, for the life of me, can't convince these guys that if it's not your day job, you're going to have to try even harder than I do, because it is my day job, and I spend that much time on it every time I do a presentation.
I think that's really inspiring stuff. While we both know they might not spend quite as much time as you do, I think at least maybe will prevent them from just doing it on the plane based on that conversation. So as a final thought, you've obviously put together some really good books. I'd like you to share a little bit about the books that you've put together. And then to wrap up, let the listeners know of 1 or 2 books not authored by you that you think they should be paying attention to.
So my books, I've had 3 books that have had reasonable success over the last 15 years. I had a book around local marketing for small business years ago, which was really just giving a bunch of small businesses the tactics and the things they needed to consider if they were trying to market their business on a B2C or a B2B basis in their backyard. In 2009, I had another book released here in the US, which is the reason we came to America. The book was called The Naked Entrepreneur, and it was essentially about a life shift for me that I had a year or 2 earlier, where pretty much I hit the wall. We had a bunch of businesses going really well. Things were going great. Life was good. But I just ran out of energy and I ran out of motivation and pretty much just burned out. So I ended up selling everything, writing this book in a bit of a sabbatical year that I had through 2008. And the book was released here end of 2008, early 2009, and it went quite well, so we decided to stay. And then more recently, I had another book called Future-Proofing Your Business, and that was an Amazon bestseller. And that was essentially just taking the journey that we'd had in business for the last 20 years and highlighting a number of things that we had learned that helped us look further into the future to future-proof our business from economic, industry, or emotional cycles that were no doubt going to affect us moving forward. And so it was really about learning from the past, applying it to the present to protect yourself in the future. Because I think what happens is, as humans, we remember the good times, we forget the bad times. By way of example, we've still got a bunch of people sitting around now saying, wow, I'm glad 2008's over. We've finally recovered. Thank heavens we're never going to see that again. You know what? We are overdue for another correction, and it will be just as big, it'll be just as ugly, it'll be just as hairy for most people, but we will have forgotten what we learned in 2008, so we're not making ourselves resilient for our future by applying what we learned from the past to the present to protect tomorrow. And I think that's really significant in our journey. And so future-proofing your business for me was really a good way for me to share some of our good days and our bad days to help others be more resilient through the cycles that they go through in business, the economic, industry, emotional cycles that are all going to have effect on us over the next part of our journey. They're the 3 that I've authored. The couple that I really have got a lot from over the years that are a tad obscure, there's a book called The Rise and Rise of Kerry Packer. Kerry Packer was one of the first Australian billionaires years ago. He owned a number of newspapers, magazines, and television stations. And he was a second-generation business person. His father was incredibly talented in building and getting the business going. But Kerry took this thing to the next stratosphere. And the book tells his journey of taking over the business from his father and growing it through the next generation and taking a wealth position of about, I think it was about $300 or $400 million and turning it into about $6 billion. And there's a really cool, open and honest example of an everyday guy, just a knockabout everyday guy having a go and taking a real, authentic view of life and business and not wavering off that position. And I learned a lot from the book and I learned a lot from his journey. I think he's still one of the greatest business people that Australia's ever produced. The other one is, again, a little bit obscure, a book called The Rockefeller Habits by an author called Vern Harnish. Now, Vern was one of the early founders of the Entrepreneurs Organization 20 years ago, a group that I've been a part of for a very long time and was, in fact, global president of the organization back in 2006. Vern's got a really cool way of distilling what Rockefeller used to do back in the 30s to find opportunity in an obstacle and to ensure that he was resilient through the Great Depression and on through a number of other financial shifts that the company's endured over the years. And he breaks it down into bite-sized bits. So it gives you really simple things to execute in your business from a tactical perspective that really instills some of the habits that Rockefeller had that made their business what it was back in the day, and certainly as it's carried through over the years. And again, it's not one of those books that you see on a shelf that everyone knows, but I found it to be very helpful for me to organise my business more efficiently and more effectively and allow me the time to be more creative and more strategic on the way I approached our companies, and more recently, allow me the time to spend more time on the beach with the kids because we are more efficient and more effective. I think for any business owner, B2B, B2C, big business, small business, I found those two books to be really helpful from a tactical perspective to pull me into line as a business leader and help me evolve such that I can evolve the businesses we were leading.
Cool. Well, I really like those books you shared because while it's great if somebody I interview mentions something that's been on the New York Times bestseller list, we know those books. So it's really great to share some of those books that are a little less heralded. I just want to thank you for being on the show. Troy, you've been a great guest, and I'm sure the listeners learned a lot from you.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
And that concludes my interview with Troy. I really enjoyed chatting with Troy. He had a ton of great tips if you're going to give a conference talk or you already have one on your schedule. If you want to learn more about Troy, you can visit his site at troyhazard.com. And finally, as a closing note, if you're looking for more B2B insights, don't forget to visit my company, cascadeinsights.com, where we have a plethora of articles, studies, and show notes, all of which will help you become smarter about the world of B2B. Thanks for listening.